Hello everybody, I'm George from Ireland. So in this video I'm going to be asking whether Prince Andrew will end up in jail because His Royal Highness is in deep hot water. He's almost universally regarded as a disgrace to the British royal family, and he appears to incarnate all the negative stereotypes about royalty. He's got a sense of entitlement, he's conceited, he's afflicted with class blindness, with greed, and with a withering disdain for the lower orders, of whom I am one. These are his most prominent traits. So his unenviable behaviour, his behaviours earned him a certain moniker, the Duke of Puke. His ineptitude, folly, and his unwillingness to heed expert advice are shocking, presumably because his PR chief resigned before that cataclysmic interview with Emily Maitlis in November last. So His Royal Highness is enamoured of the wealth, privilege, the vainglorious titles, and the frippery that are the accoutrements of his princely status. But he doesn't want to go along with the burdensome duties and the constraints on his behaviour, which are the concomitants of such extraordinary privilege. So he is Prince Charmless, as has been demonstrated amply by that interview. So Prince Andrew, he's the Duke of York as well, so I'll call him by the title. He sums up Tom Paine's dictum that monarchy so often gives us an ass for a lion, because a prince is supposed to be leonine in courage, both moral and physical, supposed to comport himself with incomparable decorum. Now, this particular prince, is an apex predator, but not in a good sense, and quite often he's asinine in his behaviour, goatish in his sexual appetites, so his name is mud. Over 230 organisations have severed all ties with him since that interview last year. So HRH was a bosom buddy of Jeffrey Epstein for nigh on 20 years. Prince Andrew invited Mr. Epstein to stay with him at Windsor Castle, at Sandringham, and other royal residences. And of course, Prince Andrew was a guest of Jeffrey Epstein on numerous occasions in New York, in Florida, and elsewhere. So Mr. Epstein was at best an ephebophile. Now, Victoria Roberts Gouffre, Roberts, her maiden name, Gouffre, I think it's pronounced as her married name. She alleges that in 2001, I think it was, she was pressured into copulating with the prince at Ghislaine Maxwell's residence in London. Now, at the time, Victoria was 17 years of age and the prince was 42. Now, there's that photo of her posing with the prince. She looks like she's beaming there. Glamorously got up. Ghislaine Maxwell looks on in the background. Now, he's got his hand, Prince Andrew's got his hand peremptorily around her waist. You can see it coming out on the side like that. What kind of way is that to have your arm around someone? I think more than just avuncular. You might have it around here, around her shoulder, but down the waist, I think that signifies something different. I mean, by no means is it proof positive that coitus took place. So, questioned by Emily Maitlis about this, the prince said, "I don't remember ever meeting this woman." Pointedly, he did not deny having had sex with that 17-year-old. Now, as he says he doesn't remember meeting her, that leaves open the possibility that he met her, indeed copulated with her, but is completely forgotten. Now, is it likely that a 40-something would totally forget sex with a 17-year-old? If he did forget, why would he forget? Perhaps at the age of 42, having sex with a teenager was so routine, there were so many teenagers he bedded, that he just forgot them very easily. I'm almost the age he was at the time, and if I did it with a teenager, I would not forget. And obviously, because of my work, I can't legally do it with anyone under 18. And by the way, I never have done it with anyone under 18. So the prince's memory is bizarre, to say the least. On the one hand, he remembers his alibi about the night in question, weirdly distinctly, as he said himself, about going to Pizza Express in Woking. But then he suffered sudden amnesia about whether he'd met Miss Roberts. He didn't say that he had met her for sure, only that he could not recall doing so. But when he reminisces about going to a pizzeria, well, his memory about that one is crystalline. So the prince's alibi in relation to the night in question is threadbare. He says he couldn't possibly be in London that night because he was in Pizza Express Woking at 5 o'clock in the evening. Now, to drive from Woking to central London takes an hour. Even in terrible traffic, it would take 2 hours. Could he not have made it to London by midnight? Yes, of course he could have made it. So the prince was caught out in telling numerous porky pies. He deceived the public about when he first met Epstein and whether he perspires, whether he only wears casual clothes in London, when he last met Epstein, when he last had contact with him, and on and on and on. So His Royal Highness claims he didn't ply Miss Roberts with drinks at Tramp's nightclub, which is on Jermyn Street in London. He said, I don't even know where the bar is, I've never bought drinks there. Well, that's because other people bought drinks for you, and obviously so miserly, he never buys anyone drinks. He wouldn't actually have to physically go to the bar. I think there would be table service, especially for him. He always insists on being treated better. And anyway, it might have been Epstein who was getting astocious. The prince is very miserly. So the age of consent in England is 16. So if the prince did have consensual intercourse with a 17-year-old, no offence would be committed. But anyway, if this act of intercourse took place, was it consensual? Now, Victoria Roberts says that she was pressurised into coitus with the royal. So that's not quite rape. But if she was blind drunk, that would have vitiated her consent. Possibly her will was overborne. Now, in the prince's defence, people say, well, she was no maiden at the time. It's easy to see why she'd be attracted to a distinguished-looking 42-year-old prince. Okay, but just because someone's not a virgin doesn't make it acceptable to do something against her will. Did he do anything against her will? I don't know. So Miss Roberts says that the prince was perspiring profusely when she met him. Now, he claims that that's bogus because he didn't sweat from 1982, the Falklands conflict, until shortly before his cataclysmic 2019 interview. So this much-mocked claim has had him scornfully dubbed his royal dryness. So Miss Roberts claims that she engaged with coitus with HRH in various locations in the USA, such as Florida. Now, in Florida, the age of consent is 18, and she claims she did it under the age of 18 with him, so that would be a serious offence. I mean, Mr. Epstein, if he was still alive and were convicted of everything he was accused of, he would have got reclusio perpetua. So, anyway, but even if Prince Andrew did it with her when she was under 18 in Florida, you could say that actually it was honest belief that she was over 18. Did he bother to ask? Or maybe he did. She could have deceived him. So Prince Andrew was asked whether that photo of him with Miss Roberts was genuine or not. He said he couldn't tell. But if there was any way they thought, well, we can't authenticate it, they would have cast doubt on it and said it was a forgery. It could be genuine, but just doctored with the hand around the waist thing. So the prince is notorious for his satyriasis. He was long known as Randy Andy, and in case you don't know, in British slang, Randy means someone with an inordinately high sex drive. So the Duke of York was definitely a friend of Ghislaine Maxwell's for decades. She's a year younger than him. She was born on Christmas Day, 1961. She's now suspected of being a procuress. So the prince's association with this demi-mondaine was imprudent, to say the least. He was also injudicious to be so close to Jeffrey Epstein, indeed for several years after he knew that Mr. Epstein had been charged with a sex crime against a minor. Obviously, presumption of innocence, but then he was convicted and the prince continued to be his friend until he decided to end it in person. So Mr. Epstein had an extraordinary number of teenage girls in his residences. Not a crime as such. Now, Miss Maxwell is alleged to have taught the girls the right embouchure to provide oral ministrations to Epstein. So many regard her as being a sexual predator too. So Miss Maxwell is accused of sex crimes by at least 3 women. Now, she's patently heterosexual, which may have allayed their fears when they met her, thought, well, she can't be trying to predate me. But people say that she was a facilitator. I mean, I obviously presume her innocence too. So the prince was accused of sex crimes by more than one woman, saying that something happened when she was below 18 at the time. And one of those women also accused Professor Alan Dershowitz of raping her. Now, the professor gave a very categorical denial and said that he's never had intercourse with anyone besides his spouse. That woman is no longer accusing him. The accusation is widely regarded as risible. So Dershowitz is an indefatigable advocate for crimes against humanity when committed against the Palestinians. But a sex criminal he is not. And the woman who falsely accused the professor has undermined her credibility. But it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that her allegations against the Duke are true. Just because she's lied about Dershowitz doesn't prove that she's lied about Prince Andrew, although, yes, she's impugned her own credibility and she's not regarded as a very believable witness. So, anyway, the prince claims that he did not notice an extraordinary number of very young women in all his sojourns at Epstein's properties. Now, if he did spot them, he said he would have assumed they're staff. Okay, they could have been cleaners, cooks, things like that. He's used to having lots of staff around, and it's well known he treats them appallingly and often swears at them on the slightest pretext. So, because you know, the measure of a gentleman is how you treat the lowliest of your staff. So, the Duke is a crashing snob. So he always tells them to fuck off even when they perform their duty by waking him up at the appointed hour. And a police officer who mistook him for an intruder in the grounds of Buckingham Palace drew his firearm on the prince. The prince went apoplectic. The officers being vigilant. You can see Paul Page, a former royal protection officer, saying how Prince Andrew always refused to follow protocol, wouldn't give them the names of their guests because they had to know who to sign in, and that was for the prince's own protection. Because the guests are not searched unless you want to subject them to that indignity, because they could be hiding a gun, a bomb, a knife, poison, or could be a guest who's just going to kill him or the queen with bare hands. But the prince wasn't going to do anything, wasn't going to follow the rules, and the police were caught on the horns of dilemma, because if they don't know what the prince wants, they'll be off the royal protection squad. If they do what he wants, and the prince gets assassinated, it'll be on their head. So in the 1980s, Prince Andrew was chairman of a children's charity, and as he said himself, he was trained to look for indications of sexual abuse, but he didn't see anything remotely suspicious in Epstein's domiciles. So it could be that Epstein hid them away. He had his stable of young women, girls, in buildings away from Prince Andrew on these big compounds, or make sure they were not in the same place that Prince Andrew was ever, because he owned a number of properties around the world. So Miss Maxwell is currently on remand in the United States. Her trial is due to commence in a year. She faces charges of transporting minors across state lines with a view to having them participate in unlawful acts of a sexual nature and so forth. So this woman faces a 35-year sentence if convicted, and this might induce her to testify against the prince. Is she going to sing like a canary? Well, possibly to save her own hide. Now, the prince has shown his unwisdom in granting a full-length interview. At all was always unwise, even if the subject had not been his indefensible conduct. Now, the interview is meant to make them relatable, royalty that is, but it sort of humanise him in a bad way. Royalty should be seen and not heard. They're often disappointingly ordinary, and the prince revealed his own mediocrity. Don't let too much daylight into the magic. I don't recall who said that. You know, he's shattered the mystique of royalty. So, at the age of, when I was 13, Prince Andrew visited my school, and he didn't evince the least attraction to the schoolgirls. They were far too old for him. Joke, cruel joke. Anyway, I was introduced to this most exalted personage, and I felt decidedly diffident. I was somewhat awestruck by his exalted status. Anyway, he was notable for his bonhomie, his gaiety, his garrulousness, and there were gales of laughter from the table he was at luncheon. I wasn't on his table, but I was one of those considered high status enough to even be in the same dining room as him, chatting to this super posh bird who was one of his flunkies. So the prince doesn't need alcohol. He behaves like he's permanently drunk, because he never touches a drop. So in the 90s, a member of the Prince of Wales's staff told me the rumour that Prince Andrew was HIV positive. Now, I don't know if that's true. If he came out, he would help destigmatise it, encourage other people to get tested. Remember, Princess Diana was all into that kind of stuff. Now, shortly after Prince Andrew divorced Sarah Ferguson, she revealed in an interview that she'd had an HIV test. She did not reveal the result. The Duchess of York and her ex-husband, Prince Andrew, were known to be fast. And as libertines, they exposed the royal family to controversy. Obviously, I don't think it reflects any discredit on anyone to be HIV positive. But some people do. Anyway, HRH has a richly deserved reputation for being a dimwit and a buffoon, and he is deeply impressed by his own title, Duke of York. He seems to be struck by himself, and he expects everybody else to feel likewise. He's a sort of a hooray Henry character, as they used to say. Anyway, so the Duke spent a great deal of time in Kazakhstan as an envoy for British trade. WikiLeaks revealed that as a dinner for British business executives, he delivered this barnstorming oration against anti-corruption laws, saying anyone would think the government doesn't want us to do any business. And it met with guffaws of approbation from business people who had evidently dined well. So HRH, he is the second son and the third child of Elizabeth II, and Andrew is said to be his mother's favourite. Well, it's done him no good since he behaves like a spoilt toddler. He's the least academic in the family, but someone who's unscholarly could be best blessed with ample common sense. Now, he's patently bereft of that. He's lived in a royal bubble, and I know it's difficult to stay sane if you get all this unearned adulation. So he's let royalty go to his head. Other members of the royal family are not devoid of street smarts, and they have some emotional intelligence. Okay, he's just, not blessed with that. That's not his fault, that his psychology, to some extent. And to another level, he has to take responsibility for his behaviour. So he went to Gordonstoun School. He spent some time in Canada. Then he enlisted at the Royal Naval Academy, Britannia. It's in the town of Dartmouth. He was commissioned into the Royal Navy, and he was a passable naval officer. So Churchill famously said that Royal Navy is about rum, sodomy, and the lash. Now, what is it about this that appealed to Prince Andrew? Certainly not rum. He's teetotal. Now, flippancy aside, I don't think Prince Andrew is ever rumoured to have played the pink oboe, quite the opposite. A seaman is said to have a wife in every port. So womanising will have appealed incomparably to him. He's the archetypal philanderer. The old sea dog appears to have picked up his morals at the dockside. So no doubt his shipmates would have sung, "What Shall We Do with a Horny Sailor?" And you see footage of the 1982 expedition to the Falklands crossing the equator on ships. They always have a bit of a celebration. If you're first time crossing the equator, then they play tricks on you, and Prince Andrew had to be part of this, had to be sort of dunked in some barrel of seawater, and some sailors dress up as women with very short dresses or whatever, and balloons for massive boobs and things like that. And they're all wolf whistling. So anyway, he had two ranks within the Royal Navy, one substantive and one honorary. And he said when he was in his substantive rank, his seniors would upbraid him as they would anybody else if they felt he was deficient in his execution of his duties. So his younger brother, Prince Edward, is the artistic one of the family. He went to Cambridge, and then he was ordered by his mother to enlist in the armed forces, but the only family which still does that, despite him being a delicate youth and unsuitable to military life. So the last family in Britain where males are expected to volunteer for the military. Anyway, Prince Edward joined the Royal Marines to train as an officer, but he couldn't take it, and he dropped out after a few months. He was panned in the press as wimp of the Windsors. Most people couldn't take it. I mean, it wouldn't last one day in that. So felt a bit sorry for him. So Prince Edward was a bit different from the others, and when he was in his 20s, he experimented with being a catamite. A very eminent gay rights agitator told me about that. The prince tried homosexuality. So no blame attaches to the prince for that. And I have it on good authority that his wife, Sophie Rhys-Jones, now the Countess of Wessex, that she dabbled in lesbianism in her 20s. So back to Prince Andrew. In the early 80s, he had a romantic relationship with this British-American actress, Koo Stark. And she's best known for her appearance in a salacious drama entitled Emily, in which she played the title role. It's about a bisexual awakening. Now, the prince thought that Koo Stark might be marriage material, despite having starred in a sub-pornographic film. Anyway, Prince Andrew, he then married Sarah Ferguson. Fergie, as she was known, was the daughter of the Prince of Wales's polo manager. Fergie was no mean equestrienne herself, and was therefore seen as decent breeding stock. But there were some drawbacks to her background because she came from a troubled family. She lived with two of her boyfriends before she got engaged, and in the late 70s and early 80s, that was highly contentious. It was not the done thing for patricians. So it caused some comment in certain circles that Fergie had the temerity to wear a white wedding dress, and her demeanour was anything but virginal. So Sarah, the Duchess of York, had a fractious childhood. Her mother caused scandal in horsey circles by walking out on her husband and two children to take up with her Argentine paramour, a decade her junior. So when Prince Andrew was fighting the Argentines in 1982, perhaps he did so with some especial relish because of the humiliation of his father-in-law, and the Argies even wrote on their missiles "Saludos al Principito," as in greetings to the little prince. So Sarah Ferguson became a princess and indeed Duchess of York upon her marriage. In short order, she produced two daughters. Fergie didn't lose weight. Soon afterwards became known as the Duchess of Pork. And her elder daughter, Princess Beatrice, just got married, I think, yesterday. So Sarah Ferguson's father was caught going to a massage parlour which offered a la carte sexual services, it was not quite what the royal family wanted to be associated with. So, as we discover, like father, like daughter. Anyway, only a few years into the marriage, Sarah, the Duchess of York, was no longer such a horsewoman. It was stallions of a different kind that she preferred to ride. And so she was following in her mother's footsteps. Anyway, in 1992, Fergie got herself a financial advisor called John Bryan. She got on very well with this balding Texan. His financial advice extended to kissing Fergie's toes as she sunbathed topless. Not quite ladylike behaviour. And as for her lover, he was the abominable toe man. As for Fergie's adultery, like mother, like daughter. So paparazzi photos of Fergie's affair with John Bryan leaked, and John Bryan went from toe job to no job. Now, John Bryan did not end up at the Tower of London. Time was that for a male to have carnal knowledge of a princess outside marriage was considered an attempt on the throne, because should this female fall pregnant by the interloper, then the infant would be presumed to be of the blood royal. So in those days, there were no DNA tests, no blood tests to confirm or dismiss regal paternity, and it would be possible for a child conceived as the progeny of adultery to succeed to the crown. In the 1960s, until the 60s, a princess or queen would never dance with a male or embrace a male outside her family. She could dance with her husband, but no one else who wasn't a close blood relative. Why? Lest people say, look at that, she's taken a shine to him. Isn't that one a bit saucy? There's something torrid going on there. And tongues would set wagging. Before you know it, a rumour would get going that she was having an affair with him. When she gives birth, they say that's not her husband's baby, that's her lover's baby, and so on. Anyway, so Prince Andrew seems to get on better with Fergie after the divorce than he did before, and it's curious he's grown uxorious after her adultery was splashed all across the front pages. She's a selfish airhead, a shopaholic. Her torpor and self-indulgence are sheer decadence. And yet she's upheld as some role for a British girlhood, patron of organisations, governor of a school, and blah, blah, blah. So Fergie's cupidity and venality know no bounds. No wonder she had a bond with her husband. And in 2010, this oxygen thief was filmed, unwittingly filmed, offering to get business contacts for her husband for a small consideration of £500,000 in hard cash. She shamelessly prostitutes her royal connections, and this is the sort of person we are supposed to admire. So several members of the British royal family have been arrested and charged, and they've been tried, in some cases convicted, and in a couple of instances put to death. You may have heard of Charles I, Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard. They were all monarchs who were all executed. Now, these examples might seem too historic. How about ones in more recent times? Princess Anne has got 2 convictions, one for speeding in a car, the other for having a dog out of control. No one is above the law. And that includes the Duke of York. He would do well to remember this. Even if his behaviour wasn't illegal, it's sordid in the view of many. And that honour of the House of Windsor has been stained. So can he be extradited? They say it's diplomatic immunity, but only when he's a diplomat abroad. Remember General Pinochet Ugarte travelled to the United Kingdom in 1998 for a back operation. The ex-president of Chile was arrested on a Spanish arrest warrant. His diplomatic immunity was held to be inapplicable. It therefore seems improbable that the HRH cannot be arrested. Even the prince can be extradited to the United States. It won't be easy. She'll fight it tooth and nail. There is nothing for him to be gained by going of his own free will. He can afford the best lawyers around. The US authorities have asked for legal assistance from the UK with regard to Prince Andrew. They declared him a person of interest in relation to Ghislaine Maxwell, the sex abuse charges. So the FBI says it's made repeated requests for the prince to speak to them as a witness. Now he's more like a suspect. The lawyers say he's often offered to do so, but someone is lying here. But who is it? The prince's legal team accuse the FBI of breaking their own rules by going to the media. So, and the FBI may be seeking him as a scalp. There's ample evidence implicating him. So far, they say he's a witness, but surely they're banking on mounting public outrage, persuading him to be interviewed, not just to submit written answers, because you can sit down and craft that very carefully with the guidance of your lawyers. Better still, they'd like to inveigle him to fly to the United States, where he can be arrested. If there is to be equality before law, then no one should be treated better or worse than anyone else. Is the heat being turned up on him owing to his princely status? Possibly. The House of Windsor needs this scandal like they need a hole in the head. It diverts from their charitable work. So the prince is short on grey matter, and he really seems to think he's superhuman. But now he's all too human. The mateless interview was calamitous for several reasons. There's the obvious salacious content and the failure to effectively rebut the allegations against him. Apart from that, he came across as a stereotypical upper-class twit. So anyway, there's his incomprehension of ordinary life was manifest in his gratingly ignorant comment. "It was a perfectly straightforward shooting party," he said with some irritation. Most people have never been on a shooting weekend. Most people have never been on a shooting weekend in their lives. It's not remotely straightforward. So the interview was a farrago of provable lies and half-truths. His imbecility and feebleness were laid bare. So he's now ruined his credibility by being caught trying to hoodwink the public in again and again. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we venture to deceive. So he shan't be given the benefit of the doubt in future. The prince's judgment is so poor that after that BBC interview, he thought he got the ball in the back of the net. He was cock-a-hoop. So even if the prince didn't sexually abuse or have coitus with the 17-year-old, just consensual coitus with her would be regarded as moral turpitude by many. And HRH has never cottoned onto the fact that his private morals are a public matter. He, with his tawdry frippery and chest full of unearned medals, he represents the United Kingdom and 15 other realms. So with great privilege comes great responsibility. He's never seen fit to curb his voracious sexual appetite or predilection for those a shade over the age of consent. So the Duke is very keen on massages. He likes 2 women to work on him at once. He always fancied himself as a ladies' man. So the thing about it starting as massages is actually quite credible. So the best case scenario is he's a dimwit. He didn't realise that these comely girls were strong-armed into it or paid by his sleazy banker chum. So perhaps he's that much of a naif. It's hard to present a 6-year-old naval officer as a babe in the woods. So the prince is known as to be crass, to be loose with his language, using expressions like the nigger in the woodpile in front of a non-white person. He's been accused of voicing bigotry against the Ishmaelites. Now, perhaps that's just salty serviceman's slang. It's a sort of argot that one picks up at the quarterdeck. And so the HRH, who was so scathing about other races, was so pussyfooted when he's describing Epstein's felony as conduct unbecoming. The consensus amongst the Duke for his friends is that he never says no to sex. His libido appears to be his ruination. So, curiously, the prince is the Chancellor of the University, or was at least, despite never having been near a university himself. So this deference towards the scholastically subnormal is one of the least obliging of British characteristics. For nigh on 20 years, he was a roving ambassador for British trade. The body that he represented was called UK Trade and Investment. Part of the rationale was that only a royal could speak to a royal. However, the way the prince performed his duties was not solely with a view to enriching the British people. He was always on the make and on the take. Now, being a shrewd judge of character would surely be a prerequisite for such a sensitive role. But he's not one. So one of the advantages of his position is he's not supposed to be awestruck by royal titles, meeting other royals. But not so with him. He's easily impressed by such attributes, including his own. So, quite apart from these unpalatable allegations of sexual misconduct, the prince has often behaved unconscionably. He was paid £3 million more than the asking price for his house. And this was 20 years ago when £3 million was worth a lot more. A Kazakh kleptocrat paid that. The US government has got allegations dating back to 2010 that the Duke was trying to broker a corrupt arms deal with Saudi Arabia. Was it entirely disinterested? Was there nothing in it for him? Was it just bribes for others? I doubt it was completely disinterested. He is not one to say no to $1 million or $2 million, or perhaps he liked his payment in services. So you can tell a lot about a man by the company he chooses. He was a dear friend of Saif al-Gaddafi, the Libyan tyrant's son, who was responsible for violent oppression himself, and had been an outspoken advocate of terrorism against British forces when the prince was in the British forces himself. Reconciliation is admirable, but Saif al-Gaddafi was unrepentant. So the prince was a friend of Tariq Kaituni, a Libyan convicted of arms smuggling. How low can the prince go? His mum is supposed to be the fountain of honour. So he's repeatedly tried to sell arms to some of the most unsavoury regimes on earth. Admittedly, it's not entirely his fault. He was tasked with maximising British exports, and he does it. He's performed decently, at least in that role. He was very pally with the dictator of Azerbaijan, So he's so often close to the thief in chief. And he visited Azerbaijan over a dozen times. He spent months in Kazakhstan. Would he have laid himself open to blackmail? It's not possible that overly pliant ladies would have approached him. If they welcomed him with open thighs, he's too gallant to decline. And these former Soviet countries are just the sort of place to engage in compromat. I would be astounded if he hadn't been secretly filmed in his shenanigans with these ladies of easy virtue. And he's as of easy virtue as they come. It would never cross his mind that he's walking into a bear trap. So he's so often been an advocate for the arms trade. Now, you might say it's up to the UK government to permit or to ban these exports. Politicians sign the export certificates, the prince does not. Selling arms is legal, and it's his job to maximise British business. Now, he's decent at that. Anyway, correspondence between the prince and a Kazakh businessman was leaked, where the prince requested a bribe of several $1 million to catalyse a deal. Timur Kulibayev was his correspondent. Kulibayev is married to the daughter of the former president of Kazakhstan. Kulibayev is the one who bought his house. Was there a murkier explanation for the prince's liberality? His liberality to the prince, the extra £3 million? Possibly. Kulibayev never even moved into the house or rented it out. So the prince tried to arrange a deal with Cengiz Rakishev, and the prince wanted a mere £4 million for this, another Kazakh businessman. So he's tirelessly working as a trade envoy in his own interests. So emails were about this deal were leaked. Buckingham Palace insisted it was a hoax. Then they changed their story. The palace said that publishing the email was a breach of privacy. They thereby unwittingly confirmed the authenticity of the email, where there he was soliciting bribes. So a commoner wouldn't be able to do a tenth of what HRH has done and stay out of prison. Noblesse oblige means that you're supposed to behave better than the average Joe, not worse. The prince thinks he's literally privileged, as in the Latin privileges, private laws. So you might think that the US would resile from seeking his refoulement on the basis that it would have a deleterious effect on relations with a close ally. However, he's damaged goods. Few in Britain would defend him. Even his family consider him unworthy of the name of Windsor, and most people believe he should be stripped of his titles. The FBI will reason that mounting public outrage will push the prince to surrender himself to American justice. And that's why they perhaps might be refusing private offers of interviews in the UK. This is mere conjecture, but their stratagem could be to seek to maximum publicity, flush him out to the US, then arrest him. So anyway, the prince is roundly loathed in the UK. So I don't think his extradition would entail any degradation to the special relationship. The Duke of York comes across as a poltroon for refusing to be questioned. Anyway, an opinion poll shows that most people have no time for him. He's brought discredit on the Royal Navy, and other officers in the senior service would have been cashiered for his behaviour. He's a waste of space at best. So if the prince ends up in the United States through extradition or voluntarily, then he almost certainly stand trial. No lawyer I've spoken to is sanguine about his chances in a court. The sight of the prince in an orange jumpsuit might give the Queen a heart attack. The Queen would hire the finest legal minds in his behalf, but these legal eagles might not be able to save him. He would likely be found guilty. It's said that there are video evidence and that numerous witnesses willing to testify against him. Even his dear companion Ghislaine might turn against him. She might want to save her own skin, so the prince might accept a plea bargain. Even that would surely result in at least a couple of years of free accommodation. He normally accepts such hospitality with alacrity, so he would have less opportunity to gratify his concupiscence. So the prince could be as innocent as a lamb, but I wouldn't bet on it. He's an incorrigible roué, and he will be soon taking a well-earned break from his sexual adventures. Anyway, monarchists were saying, thank God he's the second son. Imagine if he were the heir to the throne. The repercussions would be even greater. Same as Prince Harry, thank God he's the younger one. And also, Prince William and his good wife have got a race of heirs, so Harry is quite unlikely to ever inherit. So Andrew has tarnished the House of Windsor. The name has been dragged through the mire. It's galling that he's brought his family into disrepute. He spent his whole life shamelessly exploiting his royal status for personal enrichment. In the unlikely scenario that the prince remains a free man, it's hard to see how someone so morally suboptimal can ever have any public role again. And in his imbecilic arrogance, he thinks he can be the comeback kid. That's all from me. Toodaloo.